the Duke of Jedburn came to Wardlaw Hall at 11 in the morning to ask for Miss Selina Wardlaw's hand, and her stepmother told him, over the teacups, that there was no such person in the house. "You are thinking of my Cassandra," said Lady Wardlaw, smiling. "It is a very natural confusion. Cassandra, my love, come and sit by his grace. She has been at the harp since 8 o'clock, the dear industrious creature." Julian, 6th Duke of Jedburn, did not sit down. He remained standing on the hearthrug of the yellow drawing-room with his hat in his hand, and looked at the woman for the space of 4 heartbeats, and in that time he made 2 decisions. The first, that he would say nothing whatever. The second, that he would find out where they had put her before the day was out. "I danced with Miss Selina Wardlaw on Thursday night," he said pleasantly. "In this house, for 2 dances." "So you did," cried Lady Wardlaw. "So you did, and it was so very good of you. She is my husband's eldest, you know, by his first, a poor plain thing but with a great deal of feeling. Alas, she has gone into the north on a visit." "Went?" "Some days since." "Thursday night," said the Duke of Jedburn, "was the night before last." There was the smallest possible pause, in which the fire crackled, and Miss Cassandra Wardlaw arranged her skirts, and Lady Wardlaw's smile did not slip by so much as a quarter of an inch. "Then it must have been yesterday," she said. "One loses count. More tea, your grace." He drank the tea. He drank it standing, which is a thing that cannot be done gracefully, and he stayed 20 minutes and was so exquisitely civil that Lady Wardlaw was afterwards heard to say that the Winter Duke had quite thawed. He asked after Sir Bertram's gout. He admired the harp. He complimented Miss Cassandra on her complexion and Miss Georgiana on her ribbons, and observed that the hall was very fine, and inquired, in passing, whether the walled garden at the back was still worked, as he had noticed it from the terrace on Thursday, and thought the brick unusually old. "The kitchen garden, good gracious, I have not been in it in 9 years." "No," said Julian, "I did not imagine you had." He had been in it on Thursday. That was the whole trouble. He had come to Wardlaw Hall on Thursday, because Sir Bertram Wardlaw held 400 acres that lay awkwardly against the Jedburn boundary, and had been writing about them for 2 years, and because his own steward had begged him to be seen once in the county, and because Julian, at 4:30, had reached the stage of resenting his own house in the evenings. He had endured an hour of Sir Bertram's port and an hour of Lady Wardlaw's daughters, and then he had gone out onto the terrace to breathe, and had gone down the steps, and through a door in a brick wall, and had found a young woman kneeling on a folded sack in the frost with a lantern beside her, tying straw round the feet of a peach tree. She had not screamed or curtsied or apologized. She had looked up and said, "Do stand out of the light, whoever you are, or I shall tie my own thumb in. You are working in the dark. There will be a frost tonight, and there was no time in the day." She had gone on tying. "If you have come out for quiet, sir, sit on the bench and be quiet. If you have come to smoke, do it by the door, because it gets into the fruit." He had sat on the bench. He had sat there for 50 minutes. Her name was Selina, she said. She was the eldest. The garden was hers because nobody else wanted it, and she had had it back into bearing over 6 years, 31 trees, 4 of them her mother's. She talked about brick and heat and the wind off the north side. She asked him, without much curiosity, whether he was one of Sir Bertram's shooting men, and when he said no, she did not press it. Her hands were red and there was straw in her hair, and she had a plain, long, freckled face that in lantern light was not plain in the least, and when she laughed at a story he told badly about a peach tree of his own that his gardener had killed with kindness. She laughed as though nobody had ever told her not to. He had asked whether she was coming in to the dancing. "No," she had said. "I am wanted at 10:30 to see to the supper trays. It is a better arrangement than it sounds. Nobody asks me to sing." And so, at 10:30, the Duke of Jedburn had walked into the long room at Wardlaw Hall, crossed it in front of 90 people, and asked the eldest Miss Wardlaw in her house apron, with straw still in her hair, coming through the service door with a tray of ratafia, whether she would honor him with the next 2 dances. He remembered the silence. He remembered Lady Wardlaw's face going the color of tallow, and Miss Cassandra's fan snapping shut, and the way the whole room turned, and the way Selina Wardlaw had looked at him for one long instant with something close to fear, and then handed the tray to a footman, untied her apron, and put her hand in his as calmly as a duchess. She danced badly and knew it, and said so, and asked him to count for her under his breath, and he had counted, and by the second dance she had it. And by the end of the second dance, Julian had understood with complete and unwelcome clarity that he was going to have to marry her, and that this was the first genuinely happy thought he had had in 9 years. He had left at midnight because a duke who lingers is talked about. He had spent Friday putting his affairs in order and writing to his aunt. He had come back on Saturday morning to ask her father. And on Saturday morning, there was no such person in the house. He took his leave at noon. He walked out through the front door and down the steps, and did not get into his carriage. He told his coachman to walk the horses at the gate, and then he went round the side of the house, along the gravel, past the laurels, and through the door in the brick wall. The garden was as she had left it. 9 trees had their straw on. 22 did not. Her sack was still folded on the ground, and the lantern stood beside it with the candle burnt to a stub, and there was a pair of gardening gloves on the bench, laid one across the other, as though the person who owned them had been called away in the middle of a job and had expected to come straight back. An old man in a green apron was standing at the far end, pretending to look at a wall. "You are the gardener," said Julian. "Cobb, your grace." The old man's hands were shaking. 41 year. "Where is she?" Cobb looked at the door and at the house, and then, with the courage of a man of 70 who has nothing much left to lose, he looked the Duke of Jedburn in the face. "They took her out at 4 o'clock yesterday morning, your grace, in the little carriage with 1 box. Her ladyship went with her as far as the turnpike. I was up for the frost and I seen it." His mouth worked. "She was crying, your grace, which I never seen in her life, not when her mother died, not when they give her mother's room to Miss Georgiana. She got her hand out the window and she said, 'Cobb, do the trees.'" "Where," said Julian very quietly, "did they take her?" "Fenwick Ash." Cobb wiped his face with his sleeve. "Her great-aunt Wardlaw's, 70-odd mile north, and then some up past the moor road, and there's not there, your grace, a farm and a chapel and a beck. Miss Hesper Wardlaw is 81 and deaf as the wall and mean with a candle. They send Miss Selina there when she's been what her ladyship calls forward. 3 weeks, in general. Only this time," he stopped. "Go on." "This time her ladyship told Mrs. Pike to strip the room and turn the mattress and put the winter things in the cedar chest," said Cobb. "That's not 3 weeks, your grace. That's for good." Julian stood in the walled garden, among the 22 unstrawed trees. He had spent 9 years being called the Winter Duke, and had never much minded it. He had a cold face and a slow voice, and he had learnt young burying a father, a mother, and at 27, a younger brother in the space of 5 years, that a man who shows nothing is not asked about anything. He had refused in that time 11 daughters of 11 great houses, and had been prayed over pursued, ambushed in conservatories, and written about in the papers as the greatest prize and the coldest man in England. And he had felt, throughout, roughly what a milestone feels. He was not conscious of feeling anything now, except that his hands had gone very steady. "Cobb," he said, "can you get the straw on the rest of those trees by Tuesday?" The old man blinked. "Aye, your grace, if I let the leaves go." "Let the leaves go. Send the bill for the straw to my steward at Jedburn, Mr. Threlfall. He will not ask questions, and if anybody in that house asks you questions, you have not seen me since noon." Julian took out his card case, wrote 3 words on the back of a card, and gave it to him. "And tell Mrs. Pike, if she is a friend of yours, that Miss Wardlaw's winter things are not to go into any cedar chest. She will want them where she is going." "Where's she going, your grace?" The Duke of Jedburn picked up the gardening gloves from the bench, put them in the breast of his coat, and walked out through the door in the wall. "North," he said, "in about an hour." It took 3 days, and every hour of the 3 was worse than the last. He got 20 miles before dark on the Saturday, and lay at a posting in where the sheets were damp. He was on the road at 5 on Sunday, and lost 4 hours at a ford, where the water was over the axles, and a farmer's wagon had shed a load of turnips. The near-side trace broke on the moor road at dusk, and Danby, his valet, mended it with a strap off his own portmanteau, while Julian held the lead horse's head in the rain. On the Monday morning, the country stopped pretending to be country and became moor. Brown, wet, immense, with stone walls running up over the shoulders of the hills to no purpose that anybody could discover, and not a tree in 9 miles. "Your grace will forgive me," said Danby, on the box beside the coachman, because there was no postboy to be had, "but there is nothing here." "No," said Julian. "Might it be, your grace will forgive me, might it be that the family have merely sent the young lady to relations for a period of reflection, in the usual? They took her out of her mother's house at 4 in the morning and stripped the bed," said the Duke of Jedburn. "Drive on." They came to Fenwick Ash at 2 o'clock on the Monday afternoon. A chapel, a beck with a plank across it, 9 cottages, and a long, low farmhouse of black stone standing up on the slope with its back to the weather, and 2 thin plumes of smoke. The carriage could not get up the lane. Julian walked the last 300 yards in mud to his ankles, with his hat in his hand because the wind had already had it once, and he was perhaps 40 feet from the yard gate when he saw her. She was in the yard in a sacking apron and a shawl pinned across her chest, scattering meal to a dozen hens out of a wooden bowl, and her sleeves were pushed up, and her hands were scarlet to the wrist with cold, and she was not crying. She was doing the thing that had to be done next, which he was to learn was the only way she knew how to be unhappy. She looked up. The bowl went out of her hands entirely. It landed in the mud, and the hens went mad. "You," said Selina Wardlaw. "Yes. You cannot be here. And yet—" She put her hand on the gate-post as though the yard had tilted. "How did you know where?" "Cobb." "Cobb," she repeated, and then, absurdly, "the trees are strawed, all 31, by Tuesday, and the straw is on my account, and if your stepmother inquires, he has not seen me." Julian discovered that his voice was not behaving quite as it usually did. "Miss Wardlaw, I have been 3 days on the road, and I am past being graceful, so I shall say it in the yard, and you may take it or leave it. I came to Wardlaw Hall on Saturday morning to ask your father for you. Your stepmother informed me that no person of your name lived in the house. I have come here to ask you instead, which I should have had the sense to do on Thursday night. Will you marry me?" The wind came over the wall. A hen ate meal off his boot. "No," said Selina. Julian had been refused precisely never, and had refused 11, and had always assumed the sensation was overrated. It was not. "May I ask why?" "Because you are engaged to my sister," she said, and her chin was up, and her eyes were bright and furious, and he saw it, and it went through him like a spike ashamed. "Because on Friday my stepmother came into my room at 3 o'clock in the morning and sat on the end of my bed and explained to me, very kindly, what I had done, that I had made a spectacle of myself in front of 90 people in an apron, that a duke who has refused 11 earls' daughters does not dance twice with the eldest Miss Wardlaw for any reason but a jest or pity, and that whichever it was, the whole county would say I had thrown myself at you, that you had spoken to my father on Thursday night about an alliance with this family, and it was to be Cassandra, and that if I stayed I would spoil it, and if I spoiled it my father's 400 acres and Georgiana's season, and every hope this house had would be spoilt with it. And she had a letter." Selina's voice cracked once, and she mastered it. "In Cassandra's hand, sent up to me at Fenwick on Sunday, 70 miles by the mail, so it must have been written the moment I was out of the door, wishing me joy of my exile and telling me she is to be Duchess of Jedburn by Lady Day, and would I not be glad for her." "Have you the letter?" "I burnt it." "Good," said Julian. "Do not," she stopped. "Do not stand in the yard being calm at me. I have had 3 days of it, 3 days of that room with the window that will not shut and my great-aunt shouting for her drops, and I have got myself into a state of mind where I can bear it, and if you are kind to me now I shall not be able to bear it, so please." "Miss Wardlaw," he said it quietly, and she stopped. "I spoke to your father on Thursday night about 400 acres of clay. Your sister's name was mentioned by your stepmother 11 times, and by me not once. I am not engaged. I have never been engaged, and if I had wished to marry a young lady who plays the harp from 8 in the morning, I could have done it any time in 9 years without going out into a frozen garden to be told to sit down and be quiet." He held out his hand, and in it were the gardening gloves, one laid across the other, exactly as he had found them. "You left these on the bench. I have brought them 100 miles because it seemed to me that a woman does not leave her gloves crossed on a bench unless she expects to come back in the morning, and I wanted somebody in that house to have to look at me carrying them out through the door." Selina Wardlaw looked at her own gloves in the hand of the Duke of Jedburn, and then she sat down on the mounting block in the mud, and put her face in her scarlet hands and wept. And Julian stood over her in the wind, with nothing to offer at all, and thought that he would very much like 10 minutes alone in a room with Lady Wardlaw. "You should not have come," she said, into her hands. "Now they will say I ran from home to trap you. They may say it once. You do not know what she is. She is not a monster, that is the worst of it. She is perfectly pleasant, and everybody likes her. And she has been telling me for 11 years that she is protecting me from disappointment. And the dreadful thing," she looked up, wet-faced, wretched. "The dreadful thing is that when she told me you could not possibly want me, I believed her before she finished the sentence, because I have believed it since I was 13. So you may say you have come 100 miles, and I shall be grateful all my life, and I shall still not marry you, because in 6 months you will look at me across a very large table, and you will remember that the whole of England thinks you have married your neighbor's drudge, and then I shall have to watch it happen." The rain started again. "Miss Wardlaw," said Julian, "is there an inn in this village?" She blinked. "There is a public house with a room. It is very bad." "Then I shall be in it," he said, "for as long as it takes." He was in it 8 days. He wrote no letters and made no speeches. He sent Danby back with the carriage on the Wednesday, to Wardlaw Hall, with a message for Sir Bertram to the effect that the Duke of Jedburn's business in the north would detain him, and that the 400 acres were withdrawn from consideration. And after that, having no carriage, no valet, no consequence, and nothing whatever to do, he became for 8 days simply the tall gentleman at the Ram who was courting Miss Wardlaw. He was in the yard at 8 each morning. He carried water, because the pump at Fenwick Ash was 90 yards downhill from the house, and Selina had been carrying it, 2 buckets at a time, twice a day, since the Sunday. He split kindling badly for 4 days and adequately thereafter. He read aloud, at a shout, to Miss Hesper Wardlaw 81, deaf, sharp as a tack, wrapped in 3 shawls in the chimney corner, who informed him on the second afternoon that his voice was too soft for a duke's, and that he was to speak up and not mumble like a curate. "You are the one that danced with her," the old woman bawled at him on the 3rd day. "She told me, in her apron, in front of them all. Ha!" She beat the arm of her chair. "Drusilla will have swallowed her own teeth. Boy, you know why they send the girl to me. £50 a year, that is why. £50 a year I have had off Bertram since she was 14, to keep her out of the way when she is inconvenient, and I take it and I put it in the box under my bed, and she does not know, and when I am dead she will have it. Do not tell her. She would give it to the chapel." He did not tell her. He walked with Selina on the moor when the rain let up, and did not talk about marriage. He talked about brick and heat and the wind off the north side, about his own walled garden at Jedburn, 4 acres of it, with 109 trees and a gardener who watered the peaches at midday like a fool, about his brother Henry, dead at 24 of a fever in a foreign garrison town, who had been the warm one, the one everybody liked, and how the house had never made a sound since. He had not said Henry's name aloud in 7 years. It came out on a wet Thursday on a hillside, to a woman in a sacking apron, and she did not say anything comforting at all. She simply took his arm, and they walked on, and that was better than 7 years of condolence. On the 8th evening he came to the farmhouse at dusk, and found her standing at the gate waiting for him, without the apron, with her hair done. "You are still here," she said. "I am not in a hurry." "You have been carrying water for 8 days, a duke." "I have been carrying 2 buckets," said Julian. "You have been carrying 2 buckets and an old woman and a farm and 11 years of being told you were not wanted, and you did it without once asking anybody to be sorry for you, and I am done being patient." He took her hands. They were still cold. They were always cold. "Selina, I am not going to argue you out of what she put into you at 13. I do not think it can be argued out. I think it can only be outlasted. So here is my offer, and it is the last time I shall make it in a yard. Marry me, and let me spend 40 years outlasting it." She looked up at him in the last of the light. "Ask me again in the house," she said, "in front of my great-aunt at a shout, so that she hears every word and can tell the whole of the north." Julian, 6th Duke of Jedburn, laughed out loud for the first time since his brother died. "Certainly," he said. The kitchen at Fenwick Ash had a flagged floor, a fire of peat and coal, 1 candle, and Miss Hesper Wardlaw wrapped in 3 shawls in the chimney corner with her ear trumpet on her knee like a weapon. Selina lit the 2nd candle, which was an extravagance, and set it on the table, and stood beside it with her hands folded in front of her and her chin up, exactly as she had stood in the ballroom at Wardlaw Hall with straw in her hair. "Aunt Hesper," she said at a shout, "His Grace has something to say to me." "Then let him say it," bawled the old woman, "and let him say it loud, for I am not going to bed till I have heard it." So the Duke of Jedburn, who had made 3 speeches in the House of Lords in 9 years, and had been complimented on the coldness of all of them, stood in a farm kitchen on the edge of a moor, and proposed marriage at the top of his voice. "Miss Selina Wardlaw," he said, "I have loved you since the 11th of November when you told me to stand out of the light. I have nothing to offer that you would count as a reason, a title you did not ask for, a house you have not seen, and 4 acres of brick that need you a great deal more than they need me. Whatever your stepmother put into you at 13 years old, I mean to spend the rest of my life contradicting it, out loud, in front of witnesses, beginning tonight. Will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" There was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds. "Yes," said Selina Wardlaw. "Louder," roared her great-aunt. "Yes," said Selina, and laughed, and put her hands over her face, and Julian crossed the flagstones and took them down again and held them. And the old woman in the corner beat the arm of her chair with the flat of her hand, and shouted that there would be parsnip wine, and that somebody was to fetch the elder's wife, and that Drusilla Wardlaw would swallow her own teeth. They were both of them, he noticed, shaking. "You are quite certain," Selina said, very low under the noise. "Because I shall believe you now, and once I believe you I shall not be able to stop, and if you change your mind afterwards it will not be a disappointment, it will be a bereavement." "Then be bereaved of me at 80, said the Duke of Jedburn, "and not before." The 6 weeks that followed were the strangest of his life, and until his wedding day, the happiest. He did not go home. Threlfall came north instead, with 2 clerks and a strong-box and an expression of profound professional suffering, and the business of a dukedom was transacted for a month and a half out of the parlor of a public house called the Ram, in a room with a horsehair sofa and a print of a prize bull, while the Duke of Jedburn spent his mornings carrying water, and his afternoons walking on the moor, and his evenings shouting the newspaper at an old woman who disagreed with all of it. The letter came from Wardlaw Hall in the 2nd week. It was addressed to Selina in her stepmother's hand, and she read it at the kitchen table, and then pushed it across to him without a word. Lady Wardlaw wrote that she had heard, with what feelings she could not describe, of dear Selina's astonishing good fortune. She wrote that there must be no misunderstanding between them, that everything done in November had been done out of a mother's anxiety, and that Selina, in her generous way, would surely see it so. She wrote that Cassandra had been quite ill with joy. She wrote that, of course, the wedding must be at Wardlaw Hall, in the family's own chapel, with the family's own people, as anything else would be remarked upon most cruelly, and would injure dear Selina in the eyes of the world. That Lady Wardlaw had already spoken to the bishop's chaplain, that 400 cards could be got up within the fortnight, and that a duchess must be launched properly or not at all. "She has taken it from me," said Selina, quite calmly, "and given it back to me as a gift, and now she will host it." "Will you have it at Wardlaw?" "No," she folded the letter along its old creases. "I have thought about it all night, and it is not spite. Julian, if we are married from that house, then in 20 years the story will be that my family made the match and I was married from my father's chapel like any other daughter, and everything they did in November will have been tidied away. I do not want it tidied. I do not want it avenged either." She looked up. "I want it recorded. I should like to be married in the place they sent me to, by the man they sent me away from, in front of the people who took me in when I came at 4 in the morning with 1 box, and I should like my stepmother to sit in the 2nd row of a chapel that holds 60 and watch it." Julian looked at his betrothed across a farm table for some time. "Threlfall," he called through the door, "the banns will be read at Fenwick Ash." There was a silence from the parlor, and then the sound of a pen being taken up. "Very good, your grace," said Threlfall, in the voice of a man who had given up entirely. They were married from Fenwick Ash, in the chapel with the plank bridge, 6 weeks later, on a bright hard morning with snow on the tops. The banns were read 3 Sundays in the chapel, in the place of residence her stepmother had chosen for her. And the whole valley came, and Miss Hesper Wardlaw sat in the front pew in a bonnet of 1783 and cried noisily throughout, and then denied it. He wrote once to Wardlaw Hall. He wrote to Sir Bertram, since Selina was of age, and asked nothing of him but the courtesy of the thing, and the letter was 4 lines long, and it said that the Duke of Jedburn had the honor to inform him that his eldest daughter had consented to become Duchess of Jedburn, that the ceremony would take place at Fenwick Ash on the 14th, and that the family would be received with every civility if they chose to attend. They chose to attend. Of course they chose to attend. Lady Wardlaw came 100 miles over the moor road in February in a carriage with a coat of arms on it, with Sir Bertram and Cassandra and Georgiana, and she came into the chapel yard with both hands out and her face shining with delight, and she said, "My dearest girl, my dearest, dearest girl, did I not always say that Selina would astonish us all?" Julian watched his bride stand quite still while her stepmother kissed her. He had thought a great deal in 6 weeks about what he would do at this moment. He had considered a dozen versions of it. He had drafted in his head, on horseback, a speech of some elegance concerning the letter in Cassandra's hand, and the mattress turned, and the 4 o'clock in the morning. He had gone so far as to establish, through Threlfall, that Sir Bertram's mortgage was held by a bank in which the Jedburn interest was considerable, and that it would be the easiest thing in the world to make Wardlaw Hall untenable inside a 12-month. And then on the Tuesday, Selina had said, brushing out her hair by the fire in the little room with the window that would not shut, "You are planning something. You have your ruining face on." "I have a mortgage." "Yes," she had gone on brushing, "and if you use it, then for the rest of my life I shall be the woman whose husband broke her father, and Cassandra will be the poor girl who was cast off, and my stepmother will be the injured one, and she will be so good at it, Julian, she is so very good at it. She will have that story at every tea-table in England within a year, and it will be the truth by Christmas." The brush had stopped. "Do you know what she cannot survive? Not ruin. She would be splendid in ruin. She cannot survive being treated exactly as she deserves, in public, by people who are being perfectly polite." So in the chapel yard at Fenwick Ash, the Duke of Jedburn took his mother-in-law's hand, bowed over it, and said, at a volume that carried comfortably to the 40 people standing about the gate, "Lady Wardlaw, you are very welcome. It was good of you to come so far. You will find the road hard, but then you have traveled it before. Do you know, I have often thought how much the Duchess owes to your care of her. It was you who saw to it that she never had a season, so that she learnt to talk to people instead of to rooms. It was you who gave her the walled garden, because nobody else wanted it, and she has 31 trees in bearing that were dead sticks when she had them. And it was you." He did not raise his voice, and he did not let go of her hand, who arranged that she should reside at Fenwick Ash, which is how our banns came to be read in this chapel, and how these good people came to be at our wedding. "I am aware that I owe you a great deal. I shall not forget any part of it." There was a silence in the chapel yard of a quality Julian had never before achieved, and never afterwards bettered. Lady Wardlaw's mouth moved twice. "You are too kind," she said. "Not at all," said the Duke of Jedburn. "I am exact." They stayed the wedding breakfast, which was ham and a boiled fowl and Miss Hesper's parsnip wine, and they sat at a table in a farm kitchen among sheep farmers and the chapel elder and a woman who kept bees, and every single person in that room knew, because such things travel in a valley in 6 weeks, precisely how Selina Wardlaw had come to Fenwick Ash in the dark with 1 box. Nobody said a word about it. They did not need to. Cassandra Wardlaw wept in the corner and was comforted by nobody at all, and Georgiana ate 3 helpings, and Sir Bertram got drunk, and told his son-in-law twice that Selina had always been the clever one, which was the nearest thing to an apology he was capable of producing. And when the carriage came round, Lady Wardlaw made her curtsy to her stepdaughter, who was now a duchess, and who therefore preceded her out of every room in England for the rest of both their lives. Selina curtsied back correctly and said, "Thank you for coming, ma'am. Do right." She did right. She wrote a great deal for years, and was answered every time within the week, in the Duchess of Jedburn's own hand, with 2 paragraphs of perfect civility about the weather and the garden, and nothing else whatever. And it was, Julian thought, the most complete piece of retribution he had ever witnessed in his life, and he had had a hand in 3 parliamentary ruins. Jedburn Abbey was 40 miles from Fenwick Ash and 1100 years old, and when the carriage came up the avenue at 4 o'clock on a February afternoon with the low sun on the west front, Selina looked at it for a long moment and then said, "How many gardeners?" "9. "How many peaches?" 109 trees, and a man who waters them at noon." "Not after Lady Day he does not," said the Duchess of Jedburn, and went up the steps. She had the whole of the walled garden in her hands by summer, and the gardener, who had expected to hate her, was found by August boasting in the village that her ladyship had had her hands in his cold frames, and knew a red spider when she saw one. She had the still room, and the accounts, which she read the way other women read novels, and which produced, in her first year, a saving of £400 and the resignation of one thoroughly deserving under-butler. She had the hens, because she asked for hens, and would not be talked out of them. And there were hens at Jedburn Abbey from that day forward, in a yard behind the orangery, and the 11th Duke's children fed them in their turn out of a wooden bowl. Miss Hesper Wardlaw came south in the spring, and was installed in the dower cottage at the park gate, deaf, shouting, and magnificent, with a fire that was lit whether she wanted it or not, and a bell that was answered in 40 seconds. She lived to 89. The box under her bed, when they opened it, held £410 in coin, and a note in a shaky hand directing that it be spent on the girl and not on the chapel. And Selina spent it, exactly as directed, on the chapel roof at Fenwick Ash, and told her grey-taunt so at the graveside at a shout, in case. Cobb, who was 71 and had done the trees, came to Jedburn as head of the wall fruit at a wage that made him weep into his apron, and lived 9 more years, and never once in 9 years addressed the Duke of Jedburn as anything but Sir, which Julian permitted. And the Winter Duke, who had been called that in the newspapers for 9 years, and who had felt, for 9 years, roughly what a milestone feels, was to be found on summer evenings sitting on a bench inside 4 acres of old brick with his coat off, holding a lantern for his wife. "Stand out of the light," she would say. "You said that the first time. You were in the way the first time." She would go on tying or thinning or whatever it was. Her hands were never still and never white, and she never learnt to play the harp, and she never once in 40 years asked him whether he was quite sure. That had been outlasted, as he had promised, though it took rather more than the 6 months her stepmother had allowed, and rather fewer than the 40 he had offered. "Julian, why the gloves?" "I have told you." "Tell me again. It is my birthday." So he told her again, in the smell of ripening peaches, with the swifts going over the wall, that he had stood in an empty garden on a Saturday morning in November, and seen a pair of gardening gloves laid crossed on a bench, and understood from them that somebody had been taken out of her own life in the middle of a job, without being allowed to finish, and that he had picked them up and carried them 100 miles north over a broken trace, and a flooded ford, because it had seemed to him the plainest thing in the world that she was coming back in the morning, and that somebody ought to be there when she did. "And they told you there was no such person in the house," she said. "They did." "And what did you think?" "That there was going to be," said the Duke of Jedburn, "by Lady Day,